Hey everybody,
Good morning,
this is December 17th, 2020, and this is episode 140 of Transmission.
which is actually the correct sequential number.
Yeah, but there's still a missing 138.
There's 138 is missing.
I think we've missed two,
Oh,
I think,
really?
over
Did we
time.
miss enough?
Well, and then there's ones where we've erroneously numbered them to be like exponential numbers, but so I think we may have missed two. So someday we have to do we should release them as deep archive episodes from the vault.
Could we have a box set that we sell?
Yeah.
Actually, episode 138 is being analyzed on the Mars base with the intergalactic alien force.
I remember when I bought the Lord of the Rings box sets, because I was that sort of nerd. They would come with things. So I got one with the Smeagol statue, the one with the Argonath bookends. There's a Minas Tirith little thing that you can hold the one true ring in. I got all the things, because that's how committed I am. But we need to come up with something like that. Yeah. Maybe little Dan and Mark bobbleheads. That could be.
That would be terrifying. I think they should come with little robot birds.
Well, that's going to be expensive, but it could be a statue of a robot bird.
Well, yeah, the statue, or we could arrange delivery by robot bird.
I mean, that's kind of where things are headed with Amazon anyway.
Right, exactly.
Speaking of Amazon delivery, we could drone on, but we should shift gears.
Yeah, let's shift gears.
I'm Mark Van Stunick. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
I'm Daniel Walpert. I direct Mike at the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
And actually, my brain was going this way. I'm glad that Gus said this. I think you have to wear old-timey clothes to do old episodes. Mark needs a monocle. I do have a monocle because I dressed up as a robber baron for something once. But anyways, we're talking about neoliberalism today. Neoliberals pawns. There's a case study, but maybe before we do this, we should probably give an operative definition of neoliberal, because it's one of those words that gets thrown out.
Yeah. It now kind of covers like going to the grocery store. Things like that.
Yeah, I'm going to go neoliberal some milk and eggs. So when I say neoliberalism, it's just, to me, in my mind, it's almost the same thing as liberalism, but it's basically that branch of liberalism that we associate with the Democratic Party these days. And what it means is there's some kind of progressive seeming issues, but there's this overall commitment to corporate globalization enforced by military might. So the New Democrats, you could use that term, and it pretty much means the same thing as neoliberalism. It's just this sort of, there's some progressive policies, but it's still imperial, it's still militaristic, and it's still about global consumer capitalism being the pinnacle of human civilization. Is that a fair?
Yeah. And to me, I think that's the key part of it. Because a lot of people start sort of including, it becomes this kind of garbage can label. But to me, the really distinctive basic issue is this idea that global corporate capitalism makes everything good for everybody. And it's kind of like the kinder, gentler, global corporate capitalism, right? It's, that we can do this in a nice way that's good for everybody. Both parties in America have really been supporting this essentially, but particularly this gets applied to the Democratic Party because, they try to paint themselves as somehow better and socially better and nicer. And yet they really still are supporting, they do not question any of these basic economic assumptions.
And so you can make a comparison between the local or national level and international. So there's this game that happens where we're talking about the common good, democracy, freedom. But then in order to do that at an international level, somehow we have to police other states through military pressure And so there's this sort of, we can't have this freedom unless we maintain law and order with extreme prejudice, with these unwanted elements. And then we apply that same logic here. So that's why the carceral system is like, we somehow feel like we have to imprison and oppress these people for the greater good, but we spin it. And this is what makes it neoliberal. It's not saying there's this doublespeak.
Right.
So you can have someone saying Black Lives Matter, and then also we need to increase the police budget. And so there's this contradiction there, but it fits within neoliberal logic.
Right.
And so that kind of
So
this particular case study.
yeah, so there's a particular case study. So this is something that has been unfolding over the past about 10 months, since towards the end of the Democratic primary process. So there's a young man, Myron Burrell, a young Black man here in Minneapolis, who at the age of 16,
He's like 34 or 33 or something now, right?
Yeah, it was 14 years ago, 15 years ago,
Somewhere there.
was convicted for shooting a 14-year-old girl under incredibly dubious circumstances. So first of all, this was a stray bullet that killed this girl. It was not even clear that Myron was shooting at the time. It wasn't even 100% clear how close to the incident he even was. And our dear Senator, Amy Klobuchar, who, to me is, if there's a poster child for neoliberalism, it's her. She was the Hennepin County prosecutor at the time of all of this, and on the campaign trail was bringing up this case as a great example of her commitment to law and order.
Yes.
Now, right at the same time, the Associated Press, so there have been a number of people in Minneapolis that have been advocating for releasing Myron for a number of years. And right at the same time, probably because Amy was running for president, the AP did a deep dive investigation on this case, on the trial, on the appeals, on the nature of the evidence, and basically found that the entire thing was a complete clusterfuck. The evidence was bad, that certain alibi statements were not admitted and not considered, that it was, borderline severe prosecutorial misconduct.
Mm-hmm.
And so a number of very prominent Black activists here in the city jumped on this once this report was released, basically brought a huge amount of attention to this, called on Amy to step down from running for president because basically she was lying through her teeth and, using this poor kid who's imprisoned unjustly, and got a serious investigation of the case. And yesterday he was released from jail, which is incredible.
I think great. The sort of, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not as up on this as you are, Dan, but my understanding was it wasn't like an admission of, oh, we messed up. It's like, we're instead going to give you a shorter sentence in which you've served. Right. So it was kind of like
the sentence was not commuted and overturned. The conviction was not overturned. They basically just said, time served, you're done. We're going to let you out.
Couple years of probation, I think, left.
Yeah.
So he's not. It hasn't been liberated. He's been, well, you've served enough time, but you're still under probation. We got our eye on you.
Yeah. And since this all started happening, Amy has now done a 180 and is basically taking credit for getting this guy released, saying, oh yes, as soon as anything bad came to light, I initiated an investigation of this, and is now using this to try to score political points for now the opposite reason that she was trying to score points before. Now it's that she's so great on justice issues, and it's quite frankly unbelievably disgusting. So what this points to, though, is exactly how these white politicians have to function within this neoliberal system, right? Which is that they basically are continually doing things and supporting policy that support these unjust, racist, globalized neoliberal systems
Mm-hmm.
until there's something super egregious where they kind of get busted. And then they try to turn on a dime to say how wonderful they are for the common people.
And it's mostly a bunch of theater. Like you watch like mega church faith healer type pastors doing kinds of stuff. Like I almost always assume that they're intentionally deceitful, but every once in a while you kind of suspect, I think they might believe this. And that's how I feel about some of these politicians. Like sometimes you get a whiff and it just seems like, I think they're sincere. I think they actually believe that all this corporate carceral stuff actually is ennobling for oppressed peoples. But then other times I'm like, no, they got to know that they're playing a game, and a cynical game at that. But either way, I guess it really doesn't matter if the actions still result in the same thing. But there is this double speak that's always happening. And even when you try to call it out, I think we're so used to the double speak that if you call out Amy Klobuchar, which I remember when I did, people were upset. Like, right. She's a great woman. How dare you? I'm like, well,
right.
And
the other interesting piece to this is that this was like this great, again, it's a great case study, right? Because it was a perfect storm of a whole bunch of things. So, you had the primary races going on, you had these debates happening, you then had this intense focus on this obvious travesty of justice. And then you had the Democratic Party faithfuls ganging up to extinguish Bernie Sanders and the left wing of the party, of which Klobuchar was one of the most prominent people in that. She stepped away from the race, made this big speech, Joe Biden's the best, blah, blah, blah. Of course, she's now figuring very prominently in the transition team. She may or may not get a big cabinet appointment, but if she stays in the Senate, she's obviously going to be a very big player now in whatever legislation is being pushed. So it clearly has been a huge bump for her Washington career and positioning, doing all of this. And again, it was, the Democratic faithful made more of an effort to stop Bernie Sanders and to throw all of those people under the bus then they basically have to try to downplay Republican policies. And the fact that John Kasich was seen as the great savior of this election for the Dems, shows you how much this particular positioning and this particular set of ideals is really what's behind what is driving so much of what's going on in our government.
And part of the, it's problematic generally, but part of the we've already been alluding to this, but just to make it even more explicit, there's not a lot of honesty about this. Like there's kind of like people talk about capitalism as a good thing, but never like full-throated like praise of it. It's because they know that somehow in the roots there's still enough American memory around FDR, Eugene Debs, even like some of the Teddy Roosevelt era kind of stuff that was at least comparably progressive. Like this stuff is in there, and so they can't just completely detach. That's why, like, if you ever have an argument with someone who's really a party faithful, person, they denied that there was this movement called the New Democrats, that somehow there was not a break in the Democratic Party or a shift between Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, which is just obviously true. Like, I remember I was just a kid, but I remember the arguments on TV at the time enough to make a note as a child that this was happening. But people act like it's not, because they want to be able to claim we are still the party of FDR. We are still about, we stand with the unions, and we're still stand with civil rights. We stand with all these things, with the working class, even if they're not. We're the party of peace. They want to be able to claim that, then also say we need to have a strong, firm hand at the helm of foreign policy. And these are often contradictory statements. And so what neoliberalism is this sort of calculated way of trying to do two things at once that contradict. But then if you push hard enough, you see, like as you're talking about with Bernie Sanders, one of those is actually a higher set of priorities. And the other is more of a bit of theater to kind of obscure those priorities. Right.
We got a few comments.
Ed has a great suggestion of T-shirts with us.
Wow.
Yeah. I wanted to have like my face done up like a Che Guevara, trope. Some artists out there can work on that. Robot birds with bobbleheads that resemble us. I mean, that's bringing all the things together.
Bringing all of it together.
That's the harder challenge to figure out how to make that. Like, what's a robot bird bobblehead that looks like you? What's that? How would you make a bird look like you, Dan? Put a little beard on it.
Yeah, I want an owl. That's what I would want for mine. Yeah.
I want some sort of like eccentric crow.
There you go.
Gus writes, often, and like, this is helpful, when you're talking about neoliberalism, you're talking about outsourcing of basic government functions to corporations. Charter schools and military contractors are two basic examples here in the US. That is another big piece of it. And again, that's where the carceral system, the military complex, all this stuff goes hand in hand with corporatocracy, into kind of one capitalist vision of a better world. And so even this idea, like welfare type things that we would generally, the FDR-ish stuff, like somehow we want to shift that over under corporate control. So like, this is where people lift up how, look, Jeff Bezos wants to start his own insurance company for his employees. And you have some Democrats saying, this is a great idea. Meanwhile, like the zombie of like FDR is rising from the dead to bring
well, and and that's the thing about not understanding history. I start hearing stuff like that, and I'm like, does anybody not remember the company town? Like, that was not a good thing for workers, right? A lot of people look at a place like Google, right, and they see these movies and stuff, and they go, wow, they've got these little sleeping pods, and they've got this awesome food that you can get in the cafeteria, and
showers.
It's a beautiful place, right? Right, you can work out, you got showers. It's like, living at work and working 24/7 is not a good thing. But now it's just the corporations have gotten smarter, right? So the company towns aren't these horrible little places with shacks and outhouses and crappy shit in their store. They're like groovy things with little sleep pods that play music for you, and awesome organic food and everything. But you still turned your entire life over to this company.
Yeah, I could say more about that, but moving on. Eba writes, free market, for-profit privatization is the answer to racism. Quote unquote, public-private partnership. You can do a lot of good and make a lot of money. Pete Buttigieg, world's youngest boomer, seems like an even more amazing poster child. You're right. I think, I don't want to have to compete. Like, why don't we release a set of neoliberal trading cards that each come with a piece of bubble gum? Of course, the bubble gum can taste like those, like earwax or something nasty. But then because they all have their own stats. Like, so Pete Buttigieg definitely ranks high in certain stats for neoliberalism. But there's other areas, I think, Amy Klobuchar trumps him. Like, so it's just, we have to gather all their, whatever the RBI equivalent is for neoliberal bullshittery. I mean,
Right.
this neoliberal trade, this could be a big moneymaker for one of you people out there. Get on it. Series writes, we Americans are living with two political abusers, the DNC and the RNC. This is not a wonder that so many people and communities living with insecure attachment disorder.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, Sirius, you bring that up quite a bit, and I think it'd be fun to do an episode on attachment disorder, and it'd be great to have you back as a guest to talk about this, because this is something that has been recognized in the psych world for a long time, but it's getting a lot more attention. It's getting a lot more focus again right now. There was a lot of work done on it in the 60s, early 60s, in some of the psychoanalytic community, but it's getting more play right now again, which I think is really great, because what it is recognizing is that if we have issues with healthy attachment to parental figures and community when we're really young, that's a kind of trauma that just sets us up to be endlessly abused, right? To connect in a very emotional way with people who are then very unhealthy for us. And you're right. I mean, we're seeing this writ large in a lot of these systems, and again, a lot of Amy's supporters would be horrified, to have somebody say, "Oh yeah, this is highly abusive behavior that she's doing." But that's exactly what it is, right? So, on the one hand, you say, I'm going to, unjustly convict and put into jail for life a 16-year-old Black kid, and then I'm going to use that to vault myself to the presidency. And then when I get called out and trashed for it and exposed, and then I'm going to turn around and go, oh no, I'm his biggest supporter. I mean, it's like, what the fuck? I mean, that is some crazy shit. But people are just like, oh no, she's just being a good, caring politician. It's like, no, she's not.
Just bringing up Jimmy Carter, was conservative economically and geopolitically, pretty bad, really. He was good on some things. He helped arm the wing that killed Oscar Romero. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think I don't like the way that we talk about kindly Saint Jimmy Carter as though he didn't do messed up things. To me, it reminds me of like the kind of the Marcus Aurelius ideal of like, I'm going to retire from being emperor and then go raise cabbages in the countryside and live a simple life. Like, that sounds quaint, but he did. It's not like he didn't know about what was happening in El Salvador. He was actively involved. He did horrible things, but I still think he is still part of that tradition. And again, it's not like LBJ is great, or even FDR wasn't all roses either. No. But there was a clear shift in language that happened after him when Clinton needed to start saying, like, talking about how big government is bad and out Republicans was definitely a shift, or at least an acceleration of an existing shift.
Well, and the one policy where that was most clear was the whole argument around welfare, right?
Yes.
And that basically, Clinton was just like, we have to destroy the system. And it wasn't that there weren't problems with the welfare laws at the time. There were, but the solution was not to defund them. The solution would have been to make them more humane. But the New Democrats really, got behind that, and that was a very big move.
And I also don't have a sense, like, I was not really alive much during Carter. I mean, I was a toddler. So you were alive. No. But like, I don't have a sense that he was really trumping this language of law and order so much. I mean, that's also something that Clinton really embraced, is like, this kind of war on crime, war on drugs thing from the right. He had to outright the right.
Yeah, exactly.
Stephen writes, seems to me that we have never needed a multi-party system more than now. Oh my God. Like, but if you bring it up,
Yes.
people lose their shit. Dems seem split
Yeah.
between progressives and corporate centrists, and Republicans are either Trump diehards or not. Do you see that being feasible anytime soon?
Yeah. You know, what's interesting is that before the election, I would have said no. But what's happening now on the GOP side is really fascinating in this regard. And I think, you know, if that continues and gets serious, right? I mean, Parler is just on fire with this, right? And, you know, Milos, whatever the fuck his last name is, you know, is now like committed his life to destroying the GOP. And, you know, these people are just going nuts. They're just going crazy over this. And, you know, I think that that actually might provide an opening for this, right? Because the argument up to now always has been, and it's a false mathematical argument, but this is the argument. The argument has always been, if the Dems split and you form a new radical party, you're always going to lose.
There'll be one big Republican party.
Yeah, you're always going to lose, right? And that's been the fear. But if the GOP splits, well, that provides an opening, right? So, so if you go to 3 parties, you've got a problem, because if one is overly sized, it theoretically wins all the time. And again, that is not the real mathematics, right? There's still enough people who don't vote and don't participate to form a third party that could win. But if the Republicans start breaking up, that could provide an opening. Be interesting. I still don't think it's any kind of a high probability event, but you know, weirder things have happened.
Yeah. So, but it would be great.
It would be great. Would be great.
Mark writes, did I already get this coming in?
No.
The core issue is that the whole of the U.S. system of governance has been wholly co-opted by plutocrats, who have always had a system in place which benefits them. We are now a country completely beholden to the whims of capital, without politicians with a backbone to stand up to them, for fear they will never win another election, because they need the money in order to win.
Yeah, and most of those people, it's not even a matter of backbone. Like, they're perfectly happy supporting these people. I mean, they find folks that are actually perfectly happy. And again, that's the essence of this neoliberal system. I mean, Amy Klobuchar isn't going home thinking, man, I hate capitalism. I wish I didn't have to support that all the time. You know, they're all in.
You know, I'm going to be a broken record about this. I think I talk about this every other episode at least. A lot of people don't know what that is.
That's the sound. That's the sound of a broken record.
Yeah, records are actually this kind of like discs that are like the shape of the actual Earth. Anyways, so just to bring in conspiracies, like, we got to break our addiction to this idea of dialogue, that having calm, rational discourse is going to win the day. That basically what Amy Klobuchar needs is to have a philosophical conversation. Now, the reason why these politicians keep going to the corporate folks is because they have money, and money is what you need in order to win. And the only reason they don't do that is if there is another block of people who have seeming more power, who can upset things. It's the only reason that people are listening to black activists now, is because they're worried. Right. That they're like, maybe we can't take them for granted because there's too many of them. They could upset the election, and they're upset. And there's like been protests. That's not good for us. We need to like just give them something. And so what they're doing is they're throwing crumbs. And so this is not the time to be like, okay, Biden's in, let's just engage in some civil discourse and things will change. No, like, the only leverage we had was this sort of tension that forced them to consider alternatives to just bending the knee to the corporate elite, right? And so this is where we're at. Like, it's what, anytime we've ever gained anything amazing in the civil rights era, FDR, it was because they were afraid of people who were organized, who could upset things. And
right. But you know, I mean, the neoliberal thing, it's like, would you like a cornbread crumb or a blueberry muffin crumb? Which crumb
is
do
it
you
savory
prefer?
or sweet cornbread?
That's right. All right, let's move on.
Tyler writes, the neoliberal establishment sector seems like they are far more interested in dismantling the progressive movement than they are with fighting the Republicans and sticking up for decent human rights and policies. The Democratic Party then keep having to move further and further right. It's hard to even call them left wing at this point. And this creates a system. Like, I have no doubt that there are people who run for office, especially in the House, who lean progressive, and then but the system pulls so much one way, and they have to play the game, and they get sucked into it. Like, I have no doubt that happens. But then just trusting, that makes it even all the more not just to trust people just who have good intentions and hoping against hope that they will do the right thing, because everything is arrayed against them. Ceres writes, how do we deal with those white liberals and conservatives who call us conspiracy theorists for bringing up labor history, imperialism, and neoliberalism? I heard this tactic on conservative news outlets.
Yeah. I mean, it's hilarious. And, but this is part of this epistemology that we've talked about, where, there are no longer facts, right? It's just my opinion and your opinion. And so it's like, if you're a conspiracy theorist and somebody else brings up facts, you just say, and I did actually see this on a post last week. Well, that's just your conspiracy theory. That's the new thing. So a couple months ago, it was like, that's your opinion. Well, this is now the new thing. That's your conspiracy theory. Yeah. I mean, you deal with them by not talking to them. That's how you deal with them. It's just, again, it's this waste of energy. We can't drain our energy away on endless bullshit. We have to focus our energy on the kind of creativity, activism that is actually going to move things in a good direction. All of this stuff, it's just very effective distraction, and we can't give into it.
Well, and it people make decisions and believe things that reinforce their desires. So I feel like if we're going to argue with someone, we have to kind of figure out what they actually ultimately want and are hoping for, and then you can maybe talk to them. But just throwing facts out usually doesn't do a lot, because we live in such an abstracted society that everything is plausibly deniable, right? Like history, like I remember having all kinds of arguments with people because they watched a History Channel documentary about religion and Jesus traveling to India, that kind of stuff, which are maybe that happened. I doubt it, right? And then I'd say, well, I disagree. And they're like, well, that's just your thought. I'm like, well, I have a graduate degree, and one of my professors was one of the foremost Dead Sea Scrolls scholars, and he's actually looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this is what we know. It's like, no, like this sort of thing. Like, you can't, right. It's too abstract. You can't touch it and look at it yourself. And so you're going to believe the narrative that makes sense to you, that reinforces what you desire. And right now, we've reached kind of a new point in our society, where you can't even point to things that have been firmly established historical truths to make any kind of argument anymore. It's depressing. Random. But to take this beyond powerful politicians and more about ideological ubiquity within the nonprofit and philanthropy sector overall, as an MSW, Masters in Social Work. Is that MSW? It was wild when I realized most social workers only use leftist language to hide the fact that they are actually like any other class privileged neoliberal upholding the status quo. Yes, we see a lot of this using of left language lingo just to obscure things. There's been a lot of articles recently, and there's a lot of complexity to it, but the ways in which there are white anti-racism trainers who ends up kind of like using the right language, but then you kind of realize that there's not any material critique behind it. It's all a way to, in some ways, backdoor reinforce white supremacy. Like, we're seeing that as an odious example, but that happens all the time.
Yeah, I actually just saw the funniest example of that yesterday. So, all these books on racism, mostly by white people, were hugely popular this summer. And so they all got back ordered at these various bookstores and stuff. And so now there's been this whole trend of entitled white people calling up these bookstores and yelling at the bookstore owners about like why I haven't gotten my book on white privilege,
Yes,
and then canceling their order.
they don't want to wait. And plus, it's
Yeah.
not pressing anymore. Like we've moved
Yeah,
past.
yeah, it's really hilarious.
I miss
All
this.
right.
Ed said it started with him. Like, okay, I don't know. Definitely, there was Jimmy Carter is part of the chain. LBJ is part of the chain. But when we say new liberal or new Democrat, it usually starts with Clinton. But you could make a case. I mean, Jimmy Carter wasn't exactly a progressive exemplar.
All right, we got a few more points. We're over.
A lot of
we'll
public politicians feel like characters in a TV melodrama that prioritizes maximizing viewer numbers over long-term continuity and consistent writing. Excellent analogy. Karen writes, Dan making a broken record sound effect needs to be a meme. Laughter tear.
Glad
emojis.
you appreciate that.
Series writes, yet those white liberals and conservatives so focus on feeling righteous and holy than I am. I'd rather be wrong than harmful.
Right.
Stephen writes, the post-truth era is one of the scariest and most depressing aspects of the modern epoch, in my humble opinion. How can we progress if we can't even agree on truth and our shared reality? Alt facts have muddied the waters of consensus really beyond recognition. And, again, this is another example of, this isn't new, but the intensity seems new. Like it's just kind of, there's been a doubling down, and it is terrifying.
Yeah.
It's just really terrifying.
Yeah. And again, this idea that we can't progress unless we can agree on shared truths, I think is something that we really need to look at. I mean, if you take any point in history or any fairly populated society, there wasn't this idea that there was going to be uniform agreement, right? I mean, if you look, for example, at Palestine in Jesus's times, I mean, there were literally dozens of different religions being practiced. They didn't agree on anything, and they didn't have any expectation that they were going to agree on anything. And the Romans, the only thing they cared about was not people agreeing. It was just, you got to pay your taxes and then you can do whatever the hell you want. So, I think that this is another one of these aspects of our formation that I think actually come out of and really was formally codified in white society after World War II, where everybody agrees and we're just this happy little society, and we've got 3 TV channels, and Walter Cronkite tells us what's the truth, and we all agree on that. Yeah. And that's an anomaly in human history. Most people don't agree on most things, and we need to get used to it. And I think we just need to say, okay, what are my guiding principles and values and the way that I relate to society and the world, and what is my community trying to do that's healthy, and just go for it, see what happens, for the best.
Well, I mean, this is in some ways predictable. So pluralism, people bumping against each other with differing views, and then you have the people that want, this is what fundamentalism was, a group of people saying what we think of as the good old days is under threat. So we're going to create a new definition of what the good old days were. So fundamentalism, people still think that somehow fundamentalism is more in touch with the core of Christianity than liberals think. They don't get that fundamentalism is made up shit. Like dispensationalism, penal substitutionary view of the atonement, these sorts of things are created, and they're not even that old, most of them, right? So right now, what is being spun by Trumpers is a made-up view of America that fits their views. But that's predictable. That happens anytime like the dominant group is under threat. The thing that makes it kind of scary is the stakes seem to be higher. But at the same time, as like it seems like everyone has their own truth, we are seeing some movement. Like I talk to people all the time who just somehow woke up to police violence, and they've woken up to that reality. So there's still, it's limited as it is, hope that people are actually gaining a grasp of reality, not just losing a grasp. Anyways, Ed writes, creativity, yes. Continue writing and producing theology, spirituality, music, poetry, stories, art to work on consciousness that can create deep-rooted political movements. One can dream, right? Sometimes all we have is our dreams.
That's right.
Stephen writes, that's a good point, Dan. Thanks for that historical reframe. Eva writes, fundamentalism, it's just made up shit.
There we go.
That's
a slogan right there. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. Blazed through another episode, and great to be with you all. Thanks for all the wonderful comments. And tomorrow's everybody's favorite day.
Fascism Friday.
See you then.
See ya.